Chapter 43. Wilds Reeve. Yes, that was his actual name, though in my opinion it was cruel. To name a kid Wilds. Looked like he'd walked off a mountain. His long dark hair was streaked with silver, and his bushy beard didn't look like it had ever seen a brush. He wore camouflage trousers, a matching shirt and sturdy hiking boots. He towered over the counter. When I asked if I could help him, he gave me a scathing look. I'm reporting to some interview today, as requested. Follow me, Mr. Reeve. I led him into the interview room and asked him if he wanted something to drink. When he declined, I asked, "Do you mind if I record this?" His eyebrows shot up. "Where's Gunnar? I thought he was doing this." "Sorry, Mr. Reeves. I'm conducting the interview." He gave me a long look, his distaste evident, then he shrugged. "Fine. Whatever. Let's get it over with." I turned on the recorder. "Please state your full name." "Wilds Robert Reeve." "Mr. Reeve, did you know Eric Walker?" I decided I'd start by talking about Eric, lull him into thinking that Eric's murder was the reason he was there. Then I'd ask about the pack. Of course. He was a wolf in my shifter group. "Please tell me about your movements on the 7th. His look was savage. "I didn't kill Eric." "I didn't ask if you did," I said mildly. "Your movements." I prompted. "I worked, I went home, I watched TV, I went to sleep." "Is there anyone who can corroborate that?" "Yeah." I looked at him and waited for a name. "Molly Vaughn," he said. Begrudgingly. I recognized the name immediately because it was on the list. Had he really been with her, or were they giving each other alibis? "How long have you and Ms. Vaughn been involved?" I probed. "A while." He folded his arms. "It's none of your business." Really? There'd been a murder and I was interviewing him about it. I'd expected him to take it a bit more seriously. But it wasn't the murder he wasn't taking seriously, it was me. If Gunnar were asking these questions, Reeve would have answered. I calmed myself with effort and changed tack. "Did you and Mr. Walker get along?" "Yeah. As I said, I didn't kill him." When I didn't reply, he huffed and elaborated. "We weren't close, but I didn't have anything against the man." "Is there anyone you know who wanted Mr. Walker dead?" "No." I paused again, then asked, "Are you a werewolf, Mr. Reeve?" I knew I was being rude. He bared his teeth at me. "Why is that important?" "It's just a question and it'll be easy to find the answer," I said coolly. "I can ask Stan or I can ask you. It'd be better coming from you." He sighed. "Fine. Yes, I'm a werewolf." I leaned forward. "And are you a member of the group that calls itself the pack?" When he leapt up, his chair slid back and slammed into the wall. I sat quietly, making no sudden moves. "I am a vampire. I can handle myself," I told my lizard brain, which wanted to cut and run. Fear had my fangs dropping, but I kept my top lip still so he couldn't see them. I didn't want the situation to escalate into violence because I knew I'd lose. Reeve was panting and I was suddenly concerned that he'd start shifting. "Where did you hear that?" he growled. "From your reaction. I'm assuming that you are part of the pack?" He glared, but didn't respond. "Did you threaten me last night?" "I want a lawyer." I kept my breathing even and I felt my fangs retract. "Shit, come back." Wanted the fangs. "Why do you want a lawyer, Mr. Reeve? You haven't been charged with anything." "Then I'm leaving." He threw open the interview room door and stalked out. When I followed him, I saw Gunnar in the doorway of his office leaning against the jamb, his massive arms crossed over his chest. I guess he'd changed his mind about leaving me alone to deal with Reeve. Had it been a test to see how I'd handle the interview? Reeve stormed out of the building. If it was a test, I guess that I just failed. Damn it. Gunnar came and sat with me. "What happened?" he asked evenly. Reeve didn't want to say whether he belonged to the pack. "We've definitely uncovered something, but I've no idea what." It certainly raised his hackles when I mentioned it. "Interesting," Gunnar commented. I glanced up at the clock on the wall. My next interview was in 15 minutes. I guess we'll ask the next interviewee if they are in the pack too. Then judge their reaction. Sounds like a plan. He looked at me appraisingly. Reeve was a bit loud. "Are you all right? Or do you want me to take over?" I was pleased that he was giving me the option. I squared my shoulders and gave him my most confident smile. "I'm absolutely fine. If you're happy with me handling it, I can absolutely handle it." "Okay, it's yours. I'm here if you need me." I was a vampire now. I didn't need my hand held. When Reeve had gotten loud, my fangs had come out to play. Yes, they'd run away again, but for a moment. I'd been ready to kick ass. That counted as an improvement, right? I toyed with the idea of bringing in Fluffy with me for the next interview, but I didn't want him getting hurt, and bringing him in for backup sent the same vibes as having Gunnar there. It didn't say I was tough and independent. Gunnar had asked me what reputation I'd wanted around Portlock, and that was having my pet sit in might undermine that. Chapter 44. Molly Vaughn swanned in 15 minutes late. She was providing Reeve's alibi, and I wondered if he'd called to warn her. If I'd been better prepared, I would have had them come in at the same time. Live and learn. Molly had attitude. She was a smallish woman with bleached blonde hair, heavy makeup and very fake boobs. She was too thin to have the gigantic, unmoving cantaloupes that were fixed to her chest. She wore a tight, hot pink tank top, black sports bra, leggings and flip-flops. Cold temperatures didn't bother me as much now that I was a vampire, but even so I wouldn't be strolling around like that anytime soon. Maybe werewolves ran hot. I'd assume she was a werewolf, but you know what they say about assumptions. I was an ass. If she was a werewolf, I wondered what happened to those fake boobs when she shifted. If they stayed in place, she must look hilarious. I ushered her into the interview room, careful to keep my irreverent thoughts off my face. I'll be recording our discussion. I didn't bother to ask nicely, because the set of her jaw told me she was determined to be difficult. I hit the record button. Please state your name. Molly McGuire Vaughn. She was wearing a set of rings on her engagement finger. Is that your maiden or married name? Her eyes grew sharp and she looked like she wanted to lie. Married, she admitted grudgingly. It's my married name. Interesting. She was married to a guy named Mr. Vaughn in Bonking Wild's Reeve. Poor cuckolded Mr. Vaughn. I might not have uncovered a grand conspiracy, but I definitely had something to pressure her with. Did you know Eric Walker? Yeah, in passing. He was a werewolf in the shifter group with me. Are you a werewolf too? Yeah. What's it to you? Doesn't mean I whacked him. Whacked? Were we in a bad mafia movie? And that was almost the same thing that Reeve had said. Where were you the night of the 7th? She gave a saucy grin. With Wilds. She gave a wiggle in her seat and a groan of pleasure. Wild in the sack. She flashed me a grin, trying to provoke a reaction. I delighted in giving her none. Is your husband aware of the affair? Don't know. He's oblivious about everything, she muttered. Including me. I might have to call him in and ask him some questions. I watched her face to see if that would encourage her to change her story. She blanched but said nothing. Do you know anyone who would want Eric Walker dead? Lots of people, I'm sure. He was a bit of a dick. Does anyone in particular come to mind? I pressed. I'd say his little human girlfriend. She begged the other werewolves to change her, but they refused. Stan has a whole big application process if a human wants to be turned, and I think he's only accepted one in 10 years. She'd applied before and been refused. Now that was interesting. Virginia wasn't exactly heartbroken when we told her Eric was dead. I had assumed that was because she already knew, but maybe she wasn't all that cut up about it. I thought about the note in the car. Maybe it had been a recent note, in which case she'd lied about their current relationship. Shirley was still looking good for the poisoning and murder, but had she been hired? It was time to take a harder look at Virginia, tied human or not. Is it a difficult process to be turned? I asked, thinking of poor Jack. It's not too different from you vamps. Someone has to bite you in exchange bodily fluids. She shrugged. Doesn't always take. I frowned. I was very drunk when I was changed, but I remembered it was traumatic. What happens if it doesn't take? She smiled. They die. But that didn't happen with Jack. When he was turned, he didn't die, did he? Her mouth worked. I don't know what you're talking about. She moved uncomfortably in her seat. Yes, you do, lady. Yes, you do, I thought. Are you a member of the pack? She grinned slyly. There is no such thing, honey. There's only the shifter group in these parts. Her smirk belied her lie. Unless you're charging me. We're done here. She stood up and sauntered out before I could reply. Her pride had made her tell me more than she'd meant to. If I wasn't sure before I was now, Wilds had coached her in the 30 minutes between his interview and hers, but she'd still slipped up and almost said she was part of The pack, as were Wilds Reeve and Eric Walker. And the pack had definitely been involved in turning Jack. Had it been Eric's idea? Practice run before he turned his girlfriend? That brought a whole new set of questions. Could Jack's family have found out? Was Eric's death revenge for his? My gut was telling me that we were on the right track. I just had to get the pack members to give the game away. Hope the others on my list didn't talk to Reeve or Vaughn before I got to them, but I wasn't holding my breath. Luckily, as a vampire, I didn't need it all that much. Chapter 45. Gunnar had watched my interview with Molly Vaughn through the camera in the corner of the room. He agreed with most of my conclusions but shook his head when I suggested that Jack's family might be involved and hired Shirley. No, he said firmly. They were devastated when I told them about Jack's death. They were praying he was okay. They'd been holding out hope that he'd gone off traveling. Telling them the truth crushed them. Unless they're Oscar winners, they're not involved. Damn, I'd loved that theory. And didn't that make the guilt I'd been feeling over Jack's death almost overwhelm me? I battled my own feelings, trying to make sure none of them showed on my face. Gunnar's phone rang. Hold on, calm down, he ordered when he answered. Say that again. He grimaced. I'm on my way, don't touch anything. Get inside. Lock the doors. He hung up. There's been another murder. Let's move. We ran to the SUV. Fluffy leapt into the boot and we roared off. Who's dead? I asked. Mrs. Wright didn't know. She didn't get close enough for an ID, just spotted the body, Gunnar replied tersely, careening down the country roads. The old lady with the creepy cairn? The old lady with the creepy cairn, he confirmed. Shit. The drive felt like it took ages, but less than 5 minutes later we screeched up to her house. Gunnar pulled out 2 handguns. Clicking the safeties off, he passed one to me. I don't know what to do with this, I pleaded. Grip the handle, point the barrel at the bad guy and pull the trigger if they threaten you. No more bad guy, he said drily. Come on. We plunged around the side of the house to the cairn, where the creepy doll had rested on top of it. There was now a man. A stake plunged through his heart, just like what had been done to the doll. I recognized the body from his file. Kivik, Gunnar breathed and swore vociferously. Stay here, keep your eyes peeled. He moved into the undergrowth as I stood holding the gun out like I knew what to do with it. Fluffy, I said softly, stay by me. It wasn't for his safety but my peace of mind. I was shitting myself. Kivik was a vamp like me and something had picked up his body, snapped his back across the cairn and shoved a stake into his heart. A stake to the heart would kill us. I realized I was trembling. I took some deep breaths and tried to stay calm. But a branch snapped and I spun, raising my gun in the direction of the noise. Easy, Tiger, Gunnar called. It's just me. I lowered the gun with relief as he lumbered towards me. The killer's gone. He grimaced. I checked the barrier. There are signs of a recent tear, but any rift has already healed. Is that good? Not particularly. If the Nantinak knows how to make a rift, no matter how temporarily, we could be in real trouble. Mrs. Wright's house is one of the cornerstones of the barrier. We have to look at strengthening it. And soon. Shall I get the camera? He shook his head. There's no need. We know who the killer is. I blinked. Law and order in Portlock seemed a bit fast and loose. But what if it's someone pretending it was the... I stumbled over the name. Nantinak. That's why I went to check for rifts. There was one, so no doubt it was the beast of the barrier. I'll call Connor. He'll probably want to deal with the body himself. Minutes later, Connor arrived in his truck, his expression grim. He nodded acknowledgement and, to my surprise, held out his hand for Fluffy to sniff. When Fluffy seemed happy, he patted his head. Then he seemed to steel himself. Jaw set, he walked to the cairn. He went down on one knee, grasped Kivik's lifeless hand and bowed his head. It was too intimate a moment to witness, so I looked away and petted Fluffy instead. The action soothed me a little. When Connor was done saying goodbye, he stood up. He returned to his truck, grabbed a large tarp out of the back and laid it on the ground. He was preparing to lift the body alone, but I hurried forward to help. It didn't seem right to make him jiggle his friend's body about in an undignified manner. I'll get his legs, I murmured, grasping Kivik's muddy boots. Connor's expression was unreadable, but he nodded. He slid his arms under Kivik's shoulders and lifted the sizable man easily. Together we walked the body to the tarp and Connor wrapped him up. When the tarp was secured with rope, I picked up Kivik's feet again and we carried him to the bed of the truck. Connor pulled a plastic sheet over the back of the truck, obscuring Kivik from view. I'm sorry, I said. We weren't close, he said. Not now perhaps. But you were once. Yes. His eyes clouded with grief. We were. Chapter 46. I tried to talk Sydney into canceling my welcome to Portlock party. It seemed in bad taste with Kivik's body only just discovered, but she wouldn't hear of it. She insisted that the town needed a party now more than ever. We needed to come together as a community and I was a good excuse. I wasn't churlish enough to argue, so there I was, winding my hair up into a messy chignon, leaving curled tendrils framing my face. I finished with a slash of bright red lipstick. Despite myself, I was feeling excited and a little nervous at the same time. Excited because it was a party, nervous because it was also my inadvertent date with Stan. I studied my reflection. I'd gone to town and I was London ready, fake eyelashes, manicured nails, and a full face of makeup. My light blue dress ended mid-thigh. I would probably stick out like a sore thumb, but I didn't care. I needed this. Like Sydney had said, we all needed to blow off some steam. I promised to be there at 7:30 prompt, so I headed out. Fluffy gave me doggy sigh as I walked past, but he knew he couldn't come. I left the TV showing a wildlife show so he wouldn't be bored. I'd already drunk my blood, so I could eat whatever party food appeared and maybe even enjoy a glass or two of wine if the damn town was feeling generous. I walked the short distance to the Portlock Hotel where Sydney had reserved the ballroom. It was downtown, just across the street from the city building. But I was tottering in heels, so it took me longer than I'd expected. Still, slightly wary that I might be accosted by a werewolf, I had a small switchblade in my purse courtesy of Gunnar. I tried to put such thoughts out of my head, but the moon was only a day or two off being full. The skin between my shoulder blades itched as I hustled into the hotel. It was a square, characterless building, but inside it was clean and modern. The ballroom was little more than a conference room with commercial carpeting and soundproofing. Tables were set up around the edge of it with a space in the middle for dancing. The DJ on the stage was getting things prepped and testing his equipment. Sydney was propped up at the bar wearing a stunning silver number that wouldn't have looked out of place at the Oscars. At least someone in this town knew how to clean up. Wow, Sydney, you look amazing, I said as I walked up to her. And this party was a lot more effort than I was expecting. Bunny, the woman of the hour. This is nothing. I love an excuse to throw an event. I laughed. Well, I'm grateful. Good, because I invited everyone in town. I stared at her, eyes wide. She laughed and jostled my shoulder. I'm joking. Relax, this room can only hold 150. Some of the staff walked in carrying food. Did you have this catered? Asked incredulously. She must have spent loads of money. Don't worry about it. I'm charging a little for entry, so everyone will cover their own costs. It won't cost me a dime. She was virtually bouncing on her toes. Plus, I have permission to serve alcohol, so we'll actually make money. All profit will go to the Nomo's office, and maybe we can get that damn door fixed properly. Again. I'll just go home then, I teased. No, you won't. You and me were going to eat, drink, and dance. I have to confess something. I did something stupid. Don't laugh at me. Looked around to make sure no one could overhear. I turned down Connor Mackenzie for a date and accidentally agreed to one with Stan Omiogak. He thinks he's my date for this party. Sydney laughed. Damn girl. I groaned. I don't know what to do. Pray. Then she snorted again with laughter. I invited a date too, but just the one. Is it the guy you've been seeing, the one you told me about? Yes, it's Chris. He's a fisherman. He's in my siren group. Is he a mermaid too? Or is it merman for a guy? It's merman for a guy, but he's actually a selkie. There's a whole bunch of different water-based shifters in the siren group. Oh cool, I said blankly. I knew nothing about selkies. The selkies are sort of insular, so I wasn't sure he'd go out with me at first, but he seemed enthusiastic. We'll see how it goes. She shrugged like it didn't matter, but I could see that it did. The DJ finally started playing and the room filled up. People were eating and buying drinks and a few got up to dance. The lighting was low, but for me it was as bright as day. The best side effect of vampirism was great eyesight. Sydney suddenly gave a happy noise and ran off to greet someone whom I assumed was her selkie date. She pulled him over to me. Bunny, this is Chris Jubatus. Chris, Bunny. Hey Chris, nice to meet you. He looked at me curiously. And nice to meet you, Bunny. That's an unusual name. I wondered how many times my name would be commented on tonight. I really love carrot cake, I said blandly. When I was a kid I ate so much of it that my friends called me Bunny. It kinda stuck. Carrot cake is sublime, he agreed. Talking of cake, I'm starving. Excuse me. A moment. While Sydney took him off to get food, I found an unoccupied chair that faced the door. Of course, as soon as I sat down, both Connor and Stan entered the room at the same time. Fuck. They both zeroed in on me and came over. Connor arrived first. Hey Connor, I said, suddenly shy. I wasn't sure what to say to the man who had camped out on my lawn to make sure I was safe, who only yesterday had been visibly heartsore as we'd moved a body together. Great party, he said with an easy grin. Save me a dance later? Sure. Have you eaten? Want to get some food? He asked. Stan was right behind him, arms crossed over his chest. Are you trying to steal my girl? He demanded. I cringed. His girl? What century was this? I had agreed sort of to one date, but not a permanent love connection. Excuse me? Connor asked. Here it comes, I whispered to myself. We're on a date, Stan said. My wince was visible this time and Connor noticed. Did you tell her that? She doesn't look enthused. Of course, Stan looked confused. What's going on here? I sighed and checked the exits. Unfortunately, I was trapped and had to deal with this. I meant to invite you to the party as a friend, I said weakly to him. I hope that's okay. I'm not ready to date yet, but I'd love to save you a dance later. Okay. Before either of them could respond, I turned and headed to the bar. Sometimes running away was the only answer. What can I get you? The barman asked. The strongest thing you have. He grinned. Coming at you. I hope you can hold your drink. I absolutely could not, thank goodness. It was time to get shit-faced. Chapter 47. I woke up with a groan. I'd hoped that my dose of vampirism would save me from a hangover, but maybe it didn't work if you drank your body weight in booze. I looked down. I was still in my party clothes, but at least I'd managed to take off my heels. I was lying on top of my bed where I'd probably collapsed when I came home. That's a good boy, a male voice said from my kitchen, and I sat up with a start. I checked the other side of the bed. It was not rumpled. No second body had been lying next to me. No drunken shenanigans. I breathed a sigh of relief. I wasn't against a tipsy shag, but if I was so drunk I had memory blanks the next day, then any bloke who rolled in the sheets with me was taking advantage. So who the fuck was in my kitchen? Frankly, if it was a murderer, they were quite welcome. My head hurt. I stood up, wobbled a bit and held my head, then looked around for a weapon. All I could find was my favorite pair of clubbing stilettos that I'd worn the previous night. I grabbed one. I was having a hard time summoning up any panic because Fluffy wasn't barking. My fangs remained stubbornly unsheathed. Stupid things. Who's there? Called, cringing as the words echoed around my aching head. Come and find out, an amused voice replied. I recognized that voice. I cracked open the bedroom door and peered out. Connor was leaning against my kitchen table, feeding Fluffy freshly cooked strips of bacon. He saw the shoe clasped in my hand. Fashion emergency? He smirked. I dropped the shoe, stumbled out and made it to the kitchen table in time to collapse into a chair. What are you doing here? What happened? I asked, my head in my hands. He laughed. You drank Stan under the table and you were the life and soul of the party. He didn't seem cross at the mention of Stan. From what I remembered, Stan had ignored my rebuff and plowed ahead as if we were on a date, holding out chairs, bringing me drinks. If we had been on a date, that might have been nice, but I'd made my position clear, so it had pissed me off. I remembered thinking that doing some shots would cool his ardor. Then I had a sudden flashback to me dancing on the bar. Oh fuck my life, I had coyote uglied. I groaned again and put my forehead on the table. I didn't. Connor was grinning. You did. You have a decent singing voice too. Who knew that you could hold your own with Lady Gaga and Taylor Swift? I moaned again. Stake me now. That was nothing. The highlight was when you ranked the hottest men you'd met so far in town. I was proud I made the list. He grimaced. Though it was weird to be up there with Pack Attack. Bounty hunters are sexy, I murmured against the table. Dangerous vibes. Connor grinned. Good to know. With remarkable effort, I got up and started rummaging through the kitchen. Drawers. What are you doing? Connor asked. I'm looking for a wooden spoon that I can use to stake myself. He barked a laugh. It's not so bad. Everyone had fun. And you weren't the only one table dancing. It's fine. He sat me back in the chair. You need some blood that'll cure your pounding head. Sydney really knows how to throw a party, and the alcohol was flowing, so I think it's safe to say that not many people will remember your behavior. They'll be too busy worrying about their own. Gunnar really cut up the dance floor with Sigrid. That was a sight to see. How come you're here? I asked ungratefully after he'd handed me a cup of warmed blood. Since your date was snoring under the fondue table, and Sydney was making out in a dark corner, I figure someone should take you home before you did something you'd regret. After the table dancing thing, I maneuvered you home. He paused. I want credit for the fact that it was like wrangling a horny octopus. Kill me now. I held my nose and gulped down the blood. It tasted amazing. Stuff was growing on me, particularly when it had miracle hangover curing properties. Connor stared at me. Is that seriously how you drink blood? Yup. He shook his head. You are the strangest vampire I've ever met. Most vampires have to hold themselves back to keep from finishing a whole bag at once. I'd be happier with a bacon buddy. A what? Connor asked. A bacon sandwich. Don't you eat those here? We make bacon sandwiches, and a BLT is the food of the gods, but I don't know what a buddy is. Madness. I had moved to a hick town where they didn't even have bacon buddies. I looked at him blearily and sighed. You didn't tell me why you are still here. What time is it? It's morning. I stayed because you were not making the best choices. Shit, what else had I done? Dare I ask? I looked at Fluffy, who gave me a sympathetic glance. I swallowed. What else did I do? You kept trying to go back to the party, but that was a definite no. The doors were closed and the party was over. That's not too bad. I slumped back into the chair, relieved. Connor came over and knelt in front of me, bringing himself down to my level. Suddenly my head was pounding in a whole different way. Tension thickened in. The air in his lips tipped up just a little. For a moment I thought he was going to kiss me, but then he reached towards my face and peeled something off it. He held out my false eyelash. You had a caterpillar on your cheek. He teased, getting back to his feet. Fluffy barked pointedly and his eyes flicked to Connor. She doesn't need to. No, Connor muttered to him. Fluffy's tongue lolled for a moment in a huge grin, then he barked again. Fine, Connor muttered, running a hand through his hair. I guess you were a little frisky as well. Frisky? Was that a word from this century? I peered at him through my fingers. With you? Did I attack you? It was like trying to disentangle a tall tree from a rainforest canopy. His eyes twinkled. This time I pounded my forehead on the table and groaned for the millionth time that morning. Connor laughed and pulled me up. It's fine. It's already forgotten. You were wasted. I just stayed to make sure you were safe, what with the note and everything else that's been going on. Since you're safe and conscious, I'm heading out. He gathered up the dishes, put them in the sink and walked out of the door. I had big plans for the rest of the day. I was going to sit in the shower until I'd washed away my shame, then I was going to climb into bed and not come out again. Chapter 48. I wallowed in my embarrassment for the rest of the day, watching trashy TV and eating copious amounts of chocolate. When Monday rolled around, I realized I had to go to work and face the town. I contemplated wearing a huge scarf and dark sunglasses, but that would just draw more attention, not less, so I pulled out my most subdued clothes, jeans, black shirt, black leather jacket, and trainers. With Fluffy on his lead, I slunk out of the door. It was the worst walk of shame ever. All I could hope was that everyone else had been as wild and they were now as mortified as I was. Here's hoping. I only passed a few people on the way in, and thankfully I didn't recognize any of them. I was about to breathe a sigh of relief when I entered the office. But there was Stan waiting for me. I froze. If he hadn't already noticed me, I'd have backed out and run all the way home. Bunny. I skirted around him and settled Fluffy under my desk. Hi Stan. What happened at your party? I woke up the next morning and everyone was mostly gone. I had to call the cab company. We drank too much, I said drily. He grinned. I gathered that. I just don't remember any details. Apparently you fell asleep under the fondue table, and I went on to entertain the masses from a tabletop. I groaned. It was a disaster. I'm sorry. I don't usually fall asleep on my dates. It wasn't a date. Remember? I grumped. It felt like a date. I sighed. He was not getting the message. I'd like to make it up to you, he said sheepishly. It was kind of cute and some of my annoyance dissipated, but even so I needed to set him straight. Listen, don't take this the wrong way. I think you're great, but it's not a good idea if I date right now. I'm sorry. He frowned then smiled. I can respect your wishes for now, but I'm not giving up. I think we'll have a great time together one day. I gave a weak smile. Pushy wasn't attractive, but I didn't want to fall out with him, and from what I remembered we'd laughed together a lot at the party. Sorry, I said again. He shook his head. Don't be sorry. Just let me know when you're ready. He waved and left. I sighed and sank onto my desk chair. Bunny, has Stan gone? Gunnar's voice drifted through his door. Yes, boss. Come in here, we have some lab results. Finally a distraction. I was hoping the lab had matched the poison in Eric's system with something in Shirley's garden. If they had, we could add a charge for murdering Eric in time for the council trial. I hurried into Gunnar's office and scooched a chair close to his desk as he turned the computer monitor so we could both read the results. The handwriting on the note found in Eric's truck matched Virginia's handwriting on her statement. The note really was from her, not a plant from the murderer to make us look in her direction. There were no fingerprints on the threatening note, but that would have been too good to be true. I felt my excitement building. My gut had said that we were right to look at her. I read on. There were no prints or physical evidence on the truck. The swab on the tire that Fluffy had made me take had blood and dirt on it, Eric's blood. The dirt matched the soil sample taken at the dock, so that put the vehicle at the scene. The murderer had definitely taken it, not some joyriding teen. We were getting somewhere. We both leaned forward as we reached the final pages, the toxicology and coroner's reports. My heart sank as I read on. No matches. Gunnar sighed. None. Eric was poisoned all right, but I had them cross-check all the plants in Shirley's garden, not just the ready-made poisons from the fridge, and whatever was in his system didn't come from there. I was so sure. He groused. If Shirley didn't poison him, then we need to go back to the drawing board. We're back to our magic users and shifters. Damn it. What's the official cause of death? I asked. He scrolled through the document. Here, read for yourself. When I'd done, I looked up at Gunnar. The heart was punctured, but the cause of death was exsanguination. The chair groaned as he leaned back in it. Yeah, the stabbing killed him. He looked away for a moment. Maybe we need to look closer at this pack. Both Reeve and Vaughn denied being members of it, but I didn't believe them. They're involved with each other, and I'm sure Reeve coached her because some of her responses were virtually the same as his. I leaned forward. I think you're right. If Shirley didn't kill Eric, maybe this pack is involved. There's a reason why Thomas gave me that list. Vaughn and Reeve used each other as an alibi for the time of the murder, but that could be total BS. Have another coming in today, but the other two haven't answered. Time we tracked them down, Gunnar rumbled. I agree. And did you notice that Vaughn tried to point the finger at Virginia? Yeah, but she's human. She could have hired someone, I pointed out. Apparently she wanted to be turned, and Stan said no. And she had all that werewolf artwork in her home. Damn it, I should have asked Stan about Virginia, but I'd been eager to see the back of him. Maybe, but that seems like a reason to lash out at Stan, not Eric. When's your next interview? Gunnar asked. I resisted the urge to point out that it was on the electronic calendar we shared. 1 a.m. after lunch. How about we round up your other two beforehand? Can we do that? We can. Then let's go. I gave him the names and addresses. Mitch Schilling and Kelly Sykes. Ben Eielson is coming in later today. Gunnar tapped at his computer. Schilling works for Connor at the logging company. Call there and see if he's at work. He tapped some more. Sykes. Fishes, but since the fish processor hasn't raised the rates yet, he's probably home. We'll go to his residence first. I nodded. I didn't want to call Connor, but what were the chances he'd answer? The office phone? He probably had an assistant for that. I looked up the office number and called. Camluck logging. Connor speaking. Fucksake. The universe hated me. Connor, it's Bunny. Ah, Bunny. Did you add me to another list? Will I finally make it to the top? I cringed inside. This is no mo business. He chuckled. Later then. What can I do for the no-mo? Is Mitch Schilling at work today? Let me check. It went quiet for a few moments. He is. I looked at Gunnar. He nodded. We're coming over. Could you find somewhere we can interview him in private? You're in luck. Mitch is just finishing up, so he'll be back to the office shortly. You can talk there while I go out and do my rounds. See you soon. I hung up. Gunnar and I were quiet on the way to the logging company. I was thinking of questions to ask, though since Gunnar was there he would probably take charge. We pulled up outside the office. It had been raining and puddles had collected in the uneven gravel parking lot. I wished I had worn Sigrid's ugly brown boots. I'd looked on the website. Those boots came in better colors. I was ordering a pair after I got paid. In bright pink. Connor was in the office with another man. He was exactly the kind of guy you pictured when you thought of a lumberjack. Burly with a thick beard and shoulder-length hair. His jeans were cut off at the bottom and ragged so they didn't catch on anything as he worked. His boots had spikes on the bottom and he smelled of diesel and oil. I almost looked around to see where he dropped his axe. This is Mitch Schilling, Connor said. I'll leave you to it. He shook Gunnar's hand, gave me a lopsided grin, then shut the door behind himself. Gunnar raised an eyebrow at the look but didn't say anything. He sat in Connor's chair and indicated that we should take the visitors' seats. Mitch, Bunny here has been trying to reach you to set up an interview. Any reason you haven't responded? Mitch shrugged. I've been busy. Too busy to return a call? And texts, I added. And texts, Gunnar added. I don't have any information, Mitch protested. Do you know why we want to talk to you? I assumed because of Eric. You assumed correctly. How well did you know him? A little. He was in our shifter group. Gunnar was good. He was grasping the little tells. A bead of sweat gathered on Mitch's forehead. The shifter group I'm in. Gunnar winked at me and nodded at me to ask the next question. So are you a member of the pack too? I asked. Mitch's hands were shaking and he was gripping the arms of the chair to disguise it. Too late. I'd already spotted the tremors. When he spoke it was clear he was trying to sound casual, but he failed miserably. What pack? His nervous laugh continued for too long. We don't use that name anymore now that all the shifters meet under one leader. Yet the other two members of the pack already told us that you belong to. I said. As did Eric. They did what? Agitated, Mitch stood up. Gunnar gave me a sidelong amused look. Sit back down, Mitch. I don't want to have to take you in. Mitch, Saturday, go on, Bunny. Eric was part of the pack. Do you want to explain what you do exactly? Schilling's resistance crumpled and he slouched in his chair. We liked having a group with just werewolves, he muttered sullenly. The other shifters don't understand. We were all turned, we shift differently. That's all? You just hung out and complained to each other? I said, my tone derisory. No, he snarled. Suddenly violence was hanging in the air and Gunnar tensed. I kept pushing. So what else did you do in your private club? I asked. It was like a club. Mitch clung to my words. We hung out, we ran in the woods. Stuff like that. So why was that different from being in the shifter group? Because it was only for werewolves. I didn't get it, but it seemed important to him. What do you know about Eric's death? Nothing. I don't know nothing. Tell me about Virginia Tide. Gunnar sent me a sharp look. Virginia. Mitch gave another nervous laugh. Why do you want to know about her? She was Eric's girlfriend. Did she have a reason to kill him? What was Eric was like with her? He licked suddenly dry lips and fidgeted in his chair, picking his words carefully. Eric promised her lots of things, but he never followed through. What kinds of things? The usual relationship shit. He'd get a better job, he'd buy her things, he'd marry her, he'd turn her into a werewolf. He blanched. Yeah. Gunnar jumped in. Is that something the pack offers humans? Shilling looked like he wanted to throw up. When she came to us, we told her. No, he protested, but he didn't answer the question. When was that? I demanded. Before or after you turned Jack? He leapt to his feet. I had nothing to do with that. There was fear in his eyes. He was about to demand a lawyer or run. I moved quickly back to Eric. Where were you the night that Eric died? I was. He thought fast, but the delay was telling. He sighed. We were supposed to meet Eric that night. All 6 of us were going to run. Eric was late, so we left without him. He was late a lot. We went up there. He pointed up the hill where they were logging. I swear we didn't kill him. Strangely, I found myself believing him. I looked at Gunnar, who shook his head. Fraction. We were going to cut Shilling loose to see who he ran to. Thanks, Mitch, Gunnar said. Stay in town, we'll be in touch. Phew. Remember anything else, call the Nomo's office. Shilling staggered out, haggard and pale. Gunnar said to me. He was involved in Jack's turning, but I believed him on Eric's death. Did you? Yeah. I admitted. Let's leave him to stew and speak to the others. Hopefully they will give something up on Jack and we can start making arrests. We need more than gut instinct. He studied me. Why did you ask about Virginia? Because I can't stop thinking she's involved somehow. She might not have stabbed Eric herself, but she could have hired someone. She doesn't have any money. I checked her finances. She could have called in a favor, I countered. Maybe. Let's go find Sykes. After you have your interview with Alaskan, we'll call her back in. I'm willing to roll with your instincts. I smiled gratefully that he trusted me. It mattered. I was vaguely disappointed that I didn't see Connor before we climbed back in the Nomo's vehicle to go and see what Sykes and Alaskan had to say about this mess. It felt like we were finally closing in on something. I was determined to get to the bottom of this pack business. They were clearly doing something shadier than running around together and howling at the moon. I'd bet my new house they'd turn Jack. But the question was what? Chapter 49. We pulled up at the only static caravan park in town. It consisted of about 20 vans with small gardens, all well maintained. Does Sykes live with his parents? I asked curiously as we stopped behind a truck. I doubt it. These mobile homes are usually only 1 bedroom. Why? In the UK, static caravan sites like this are usually retirement places or holiday housing. Here in the US, trailer parks are permanent residences, usually lower in price and easier to afford. We went up a set of 3 wide stairs to a cheap aluminium door. Gunnar knocked and the door rattled. A man answered. He was tall and thin, neatly dressed with pockmarked skin, tidy hair and glasses. Gunnar looked at him questioningly, I assumed because the man didn't match the image we'd had of Kelly Sykes. Is Mr. Sykes at home? Gunnar inquired. Politely. He just ran to the store. Can I help you? I'm Steve, Kelly's partner. We really need to speak to him. Do you mind if we wait? Steve hesitated. No, I suppose that's okay. You can come in. We walked into a hallway. To the right was a small kitchen, but Steve gestured for us to follow him to the left into a decent-sized living area, complete with a sofa, lounge chair and large TV which was showing a sports program. Steve clicked it off and we all Saturday. What is this about? He asked abruptly. We need to talk to Mr. Sykes about some members of his shifter group. Are you a werewolf as well? Gunnar asked casually, as if he were making polite conversation. No, I'm a black bear shifter. Not a werbear? I asked nosily. God no, Steve said a little haughtily. I wondered how that affected his relationship because I thought shifters and wers were a bit at odds. Does Kelly tell you anything about the werewolves he runs with? I inquired. A little, Steve said guardedly. Look, is one of them in trouble with the Nomo's office? One of them is dead, Gunnar said bluntly. Steve frowned. I heard about that, the murder on the docks? I didn't know. Kelly knew the man. He hasn't mentioned him. He knew him, Gunnar assured him. Steve's frown deepened. We heard a car pull up. There was a long pause, presumably while Sykes was looking at the Nomo vehicle, and it took him a couple of minutes to come inside. Eventually, the door opened and we heard the rustle of plastic shopping bags in the kitchen. The fridge opened and closed. Then a few seconds later, Kelly Sykes entered the room. He was the complete opposite of the refined Steve, large, rough and ready Despite those rough edges, or maybe because of them, he was also quite handsome. He was dressed in jeans, a dirty sweatshirt and brown extra tough boots, and he had a day or two's growth of stubble on his face. He looked like he was dressed for fishing, but he couldn't be because Gunnar had said that he was laid off due to the current holdout not yet being formally lifted. Kelly, the Nomo, has questions. Steve's tone indicated that he had some too. He gave his chair to his partner and stood behind him with a hand on Sykes' broad shoulders in warning or support. I wasn't sure. What about? Sykes asked gruffly, looking at us. Gunnar started right in. Where were you the night of the 7th? I was. He licked his lips and looked at Steve, whose face was stiff. Kelly knew that his partner wasn't going to alibi him. He chewed on his lip a moment before sighing. What's the point? He muttered. You already know. You've questioned most of us. He sighed. I was running with a few other werewolves. Who? I asked, eager to see if the stories aligned. Mitch Schilling, Molly Vaughn, Ben Ilson, and Wilds Reeve, he said quietly. Steve's expression was dark. I wondered what Sykes had told him he was doing that day. So, I continued, you were out running with members of the pack? You might as well be honest. As you said, we've spoken with all but one of your little club. Who's left? I ignored that. Best to leave it alone so we could speak to Ilson without interference. Pressed on. Where was Eric? Didn't he usually join the group? He was late, so we left without him. He was late a lot and we were tired of it. That matched up with Mitch's statement. Did Eric have any enemies? I asked. Not anyone that didn't hate all of us. Why's that? Because we're werewolves, not shifters. His tone was bitter. Many of the shifter group think we shouldn't be part of their collective, and a few of us were starting to agree. He threw an apologetic look at Steve, who squeezed his shoulder. Is that why you formed the pack? Partly. What's the other part? Kelly clammed up. I want a lawyer. Damn it. We hadn't even had chance to speak to him about Jack. Gunnar intervened. We're just talking. You aren't under arrest. I'm done talking. Kelly's jaw was set. If I'm not under arrest, then get out. Right you are. Gunnar gave a single nod and stood. We'll continue this at the station when we have an arrest warrant. He let the threat hang there, but Sykes didn't bite. If you have anything more to say in the meantime, you know how to find us. We'll see ourselves out. I followed him to the car. Looking over my shoulder, I saw Steve flick the kitchen curtains and watch us leave. Something definitely smelled fishy. And it wasn't just Kelly. Sykes. Chapter 50. There was time for lunch before Ben Ilson's interview. Fluffy was waiting patiently at the office, so we walked home together, ate quickly and returned. I hadn't been this careful about mealtimes before I was a vampire, but I was afraid of what would happen to me if I forgot to drink blood regularly. No one wanted a bitey coworker. After we strolled back in, Fluffy wriggled under the desk to lie on my feet. Booted my computer up, forwarded some emails to Gunnar, then turned my attention to the questions I wanted to ask Ilson. I popped to the toilet for a nervous wee. As I returned to my desk, the man himself walked into the building. He was a medium-sized, wiry, with the look of someone who was constantly checking over his shoulder. His jerky movements gave the impression that he was always flinching, and his shoulders were hunched and defensive. My first thought was that I'd found the weakest link. Mr. Ilson? I asked. Yes, I'm here for an appointment. Call me Ben. Sure thing, Ben. Please come with me. I held open the swing door at the end of the counter. Fluffy whined a little and I patted my leg so he knew to follow me. I was learning to trust his senses more than my own. Ilson looked like he wouldn't hurt a fly, let alone a dog, but I might as well have Fluffy with me. What's with the dog? Ben asked. He's a trained police dog. I was flubbing the truth a little, but he was trained, albeit by someone else, and he was currently working with the police. I smiled blandly. Despite my assurance, Ben gave Fluffy a wary look and stayed as far away from him as possible. Maybe he was a cat person. I pressed record. I'm recording this interview. What is this about? Ben asked, shifting in his seat. It's about the murder of Eric Walker. Ben flinched. Whoops, I'd gone in a bit too bad cop there. I reeled it back in. I didn't have anything to do with that. It was weird that his first reaction was to protest. Most people asked what about it. Methinks the man did protest too much, him and the rest of his pack. They were all too quick too. Eager to say they had nothing to do with Eric's death, so I couldn't help but feel they were hip deep in it somehow. Surely might or might not have supplied the poison, but the pack members were involved one way or another. This is routine, I soothed, taking a line from Gunnar's book. We're interviewing all Eric's known associates. Ben leaned back in his chair. Fine. Where were you the night of the 7th? He shrugged and didn't answer. Ben, I said softly, we know about the pack. Startled, he sat up straight. How? We've met all the other members. We've had some lovely chats. He muttered something, but even with my vampire-enhanced hearing I didn't catch it. Damn. Sorry, what was that? I asked with an innocuous smile. Nothing, he glowered. So, once again, if I can just ask where you were on the night of the 7th. I was running with the rest of the pack, he admitted. And just for the record, who are the other members? He was starting to sweat. You've spoken to them already? All of them. He grimaced. Eric Walker, Mitch Schilling, Kelly Sykes, Wilds Reeve and Molly Fawn. When did Eric show up? He didn't. He was late, so we went running without him. That checked out. At least they'd all backed one another's alibis. What time did you meet and why that night? That question had been bothering me. What was so special about that particular night that they'd met to run to be together? And why hadn't Eric shown up? If he had, might he still be alive? Ben gave a one-shouldered shrug. No special reason. We meet every Wednesday night at 11, that way we have time when it's mostly dark in the town. Isn't as busy. It worked for everyone's work schedules as well. I remembered the calendar in Eric's kitchen with every Wednesday circled. Ben's explanation played, but he was refusing to meet my eyes, so I had the distinct feeling he was leaving something out. The 7th was a Tuesday, Ben, I said gently. He grimaced but didn't say anything else. So why that night? I pressed. No reason, he lied. He wasn't going to add anything, so I moved on. One of your buddies mentioned that Eric's girlfriend, Virginia Tide, had petitioned your pack to be turned. Is that true? His face paled. He shrugged again, but he was struggling to appear nonchalant. If she had, we would have said no. Why? I was hoping he'd say because it was illegal unless a petition that went through a lot of checks and interviews had been completed by the shifter group and approved by the NOMO. He didn't. Because she's crazy as F. Heck, he corrected, his voice a little shrill. In what way? He gripped the arm of the chair, his knuckles white. She just is. She's Bat's hit. I wanted to press him further, but everything in me sensed he was afraid of the diminutive woman. I tried a different tack. Who wanted Eric dead? He relaxed visibly. I don't know. We weren't that close. There was the fish stuff going on, but I don't know much about it. I'm in mining. He sighed. Eric wasn't popular. He was weak. That seemed a rich criticism coming from a man who cringed away from the shadows and my pet dog. He hunched in on himself. I wanted to tell him his shoulders would stay that way if the wind changed. But when I opened my mouth I realized I was channeling my mother. Up, even. So, his slouching had me pulling back my shoulders and straightening my back. Anything you can remember at all that might be relevant? Anything suspicious? I figured a blanket question would give him a chance to voice even the slightest thought about Eric. He thought for a moment. The last fight I saw between Eric and his old lady was a couple of weeks before. She wanted him to help her put some stuff into a storage unit because they were moving in together. I don't think they ever got round to it because things got overheated and then they broke up again. She said she wished she'd never met him. Saying you wished you hadn't met someone wasn't the same as wanting them dead. But it was interesting that Virginia hadn't told us any of this. So now we had a storage unit to look for. I wouldn't have even thought of that because Eric had lots of space at his house, as did Virginia. Why would she need a unit? To hide some evidence like Eric's paperwork in his wallet? I wondered if Gunnar would let me search it. Thanks, Ben. You've been helpful. Don't leave town. I'd always wanted to say that. If you think of anything else, please call or stop by. That's it? I can go. Yes. You're not under arrest. Great. He exhaled loudly, stood and rubbed his hands down his pants. One last thing, I said abruptly. Which of you turned Jack? Ben froze, wide-eyed, panic written across his face. I don't know. It wasn't me. Okay, you can go. He almost staggered with relief, then turned and ran out of the building. As soon as the door shut behind him, Gunnar stepped in. Nice work, he commented. You were watching? Sure. I liked how you punched him at the end with Jack. It's not common knowledge yet that he was the werewolf that attacked you, but Ben didn't blink. You're right. One of the pack turned him. The evidence is stacking up. I want to get Eric's murder wrapped up first, then we'll go after them. He studied me. You're thinking about Virginia's storage unit. I'm thinking about the unit, I agreed. How hard is it to get a warrant? Shouldn't be too bad in this case. I'll get things in motion. Maybe we shouldn't have dismissed Virginia Tide just because of her species. I hadn't dismissed her. Even if she were human, she could have had someone do her dirty work. Ben is afraid of her, I commented. Gunnar nodded slowly. Yep, I reckon he is. I'll get that warrant. He headed back to his office. That was good enough for me. Things were finally heating up. Chapter 51. Whilst we waited for the warrant, I decided it was time to check Virginia's statement that she and Eric had eaten at the Pizza Kodiak kitchen the night he was murdered. After reading the note that said she'd already broken up with him for good, it seemed odd that they were out to dinner together. The note had been folded and worn, as if it had been opened and closed many times. My money was on it being written a few weeks, or even months before Eric's death. I dropped Gunnar an email to let him know where I was going, then grabbed a picture of Eric and walked over to the pizza place. A bunch of teenagers were working, so I asked to speak with the manager. A harried-looking woman wiping her hands on a dirty apron came out from the back. Hi, is there a problem? She asked a little grumpily. She could do with taking a leaf out of the cafe waitress's book. No, not at all. I was wondering if you remember Tuesday the 7th and, particularly if you saw this man. I held up Eric's picture. She squinted at it. I don't know. I don't get out front very often. She leaned in to whisper. Teenagers require constant supervision. They are total horn dogs. You remind me not to eat here, I thought. But I nodded and looked sympathetic. She stared again at the photograph. Actually, I think I do remember him. He was with a small woman and they had an argument loud enough that I had to come up front and ask them to leave. I don't remember what day that was though. Sorry. Do you remember what they were arguing about? I only heard a few words. I was focused on getting them out. Hold on, I'll ask the girl who was up front. She went back to the counter and told the boy there to find Jessica. When she joined us, the manager asked if she remembered the argument. Jessica nodded shyly and threw a furtive glance at me. Thankfully she was a gossip. It was something about werewolves, she said with relish. But I don't know any details. I was hard at work. She slid her manager a wide-eyed, innocent look. The manager sighed. Just tell her the damn truth of what you saw so we can. I'll get on with work. What else do you remember hearing? I asked. Jessica folded her arms and cocked a hip while she thought. They shouted about a bunch of wolfy shit stuff. Sorry, Margaret, she added to her boss. They said stuff about a pack turning running or something. Then she yelled about leaving him. She hesitated and looked at her boss again. It's against company policy to use foul language, so I'll just say there was some swearing. She was cussing him out real good. I was listening because it was a bit of drama, you know. When the argument started, me and Tim were betting whether the guy had cheated on her or not. She sure was steamed. Did anything else stand out to you? I asked. Jessica grinned. She threw a drink in his face and he looked properly miserable. Then she stormed off and I had to clean up the mess. Oh, and I thought it was crazy that after all she'd put him through, he still settled her bill as well as his own. He snagged the leftover pizza in a box and left. He paid her bill? Yep. From his own wallet? I pressed. She shrugged. I guess she'd already gone by then. He paid both bills and left. Thank you for your time. I'm going to write up a statement for you. Can you give me your telephone number and address? She rattled both off. Thanks. Jessica, if you can think of anything else, please call the Nomo's office and ask for Bunny. A smirk pulled at her lips. Bunny? What kind of a name is that? I kept my expression blank. The UK government treated me to a round of genetic engineering and use some rabbit DNA to make me faster and more agile. Hence the name. Her eyes widened. Wow, that's so cool. I shrugged. I could do without the urge to eat carrots all the time. The manager sent Jessica back to work and gave me a broad grin. She believed. You hook, line, and sinker. I grinned back. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. No worries, Bunny. Margaret returned to the fray and I headed back to the office. Jessica hadn't given me a lot of information to work on, but it had confirmed a lot of what the pack had said about Virginia wanting to be turned and being refused. Was that a strong enough motivation for murder? I guessed it could have been if Virginia thought Eric was preventing her wishes being met. She thought he was in her way. Maybe she'd got rid of him, but the thing that was still bothering me was the how. Back in the office, I updated Gunnar. Great work and great timing, he said. We've got our warrant. Holy cow, that was quick. He laughed at my expression. I just needed a controlling vote from the council. Since they're anxious to have this case solved, they were accommodating. The longer this goes on, the more anxious the community gets. The last few nights, the streets have been bare at night. That's not like Portlock. A good portion of the inhabitants are nocturnal, with Jack Kivek. And now this, the town is spooked. We need to nail this down before more fights break out. More. There's been some scuffles amongst the shifters. Tensions are rising and it's going to come to a head fast if we don't solve this case. It was a good thing I worked well under pressure. Chapter 52. Let's check out that storage unit. Bring Fluffy. We might need his nose. Gunnar ordered. You ready to play police dog again? I asked him. He gave a bark and a little half jump on his front feet. He was ready, willing, and excited as hell to get out from under my desk. We climbed into the Nomo vehicle and Gunnar drove to the storage unit. Wondered if we'd find a load of junk or a serial killer's secret stash. I was hopeful that it would contain vials of poison made by Shirley Thompson, labeled with those cute skulls with flowers growing out of the eye sockets. At the storage unit's office, Gunnar told me to wait in the car. Fluffy whined softly, anxious to be out there solving crime. My boss was back in less than 10 minutes and climbed back in. The manager is coming with a set of bolt cutters for the lock. Sure enough, a minute later a balding man with a slight paunch came out, carrying a set of bolt cutters. He locked the office door behind him, punched a code into a box mounted on a post, and the black wrought iron gate slid back. We drove in slowly and followed him. We went down 3 rows, turned and moved. Down about a third of the way, the balding man checked the number of a unit, then cut off the lock. Once he'd done that, he took the broken lock and left us to it. The vibe I was getting was that the less he saw, the better. Gunnar passed me a pair of nitrile gloves. When we were both ready, he raised the garage-style door and motion detector lights flickered on. We stared around the unit. It was full to the top. I groaned and Gunnar heaved a heavy sigh. Do we have some lowly staff that I don't know about who could sort through this? I asked hopefully. Gunnar shot me a sideways grin. Yeah, you. I rolled my eyes and he laughed. We started pulling out boxes, totes, and old furniture. About halfway down the unit, I spied a man's wallet and my scalp prickled. Gunnar, look. He stood next to me and looked down. The floor was covered with dust except for random footprints where people had walked through. Hold on, don't move. I waited. When he returned with an evidence bag, he had me take picture of the wallet in situ, then he picked it up and opened it. Eric Walker, he murmured, reading the names on the driver's license and credit cards. Bingo. There was no cash and no loving pictures of Virginia, just one of Eric and Jim, standing in front of one of Jim's planes. Gunnar put it in the evidence bag and went back to the car to make a note on the log and put it in a secure evidence box. Maybe the murder weapon would also be lying around. A girl could dream. That thought made me snicker. How my dreams had changed. 3 hours later we were grubby and exhausted, and we hadn't found a bloodstained murder weapon. The contents of the unit were stacked in the aisle. Now we had to search every single box and then replace them. Why did Virginia keep all this shit? After about 5 boxes, it was clear that most of the contents were probably her parents' stuff. Maybe she'd cleaned up after they'd passed away, and rather than sort it out immediately, she'd saved it to do later. Grief was hard enough without pawing through your loved one's worldly possessions. It had taken me months to find the courage to go through Nana's things. Mama, of course, hadn't given a fuck about them because Nana's clothes hadn't been designer, and her jewelry was mainly costume. She and Nana might have been related, but the family tree had branched sharply. Maybe it had been struck by lightning. Are Virginia Tide's parents dead? I asked curiously. She has a lot of their stuff. I'll get Sydney on it. Gunnar pulled out his phone and texted her. We took a break. Even with my vampire healing abilities, my back felt tight. Walked around for a while, giving my body a chance to mend itself when I was upright. After a few minutes, the ache was gone. Gunnar's phone chimed with an incoming text. Sydney says they died 2 years ago in a boating accident. Her mum had cancer, so they'd gone on a once-in-a-lifetime cruise. When they were on a day trip on a small skiff, they got into difficulties and both died. That sucked. Virginia must have been around my age, mid-20s max. I expected my parents to live for another 40 years or more. It must be hard to lose your mum and dad so young, even if they were assholes, and there was nothing to suggest that hers had been. No wonder she couldn't face sorting through her parents' possessions. You said she had no money. Was there no inheritance? I asked. Gunnar frowned. I just got the last couple of months' statements from her bank. No sign of a big payout. But there again, people often struggle getting money from inheritance. It feels like profiting from a loved one's death, and it's not unusual to blow it all real quick. That's sad. He grimaced. That's human nature. My mind had been churning as we were working, and I finally spoke my thoughts aloud. The wallet. Do you think she just opened the door and chucked it in here? Maybe. Or Eric helped her move some stuff and dropped it. Damn, that was possible, really possible. And even if she had thrown it in here, we couldn't prove it. We still had absolutely nothing on Virginia. We continued to work through the detritus, but there was no smoking gun. Or rather, no bloody knife. The wallet was a win, but not the big win we needed. Chapter 53. Shirley Thompson's trial day had arrived. Gunnar had explained that growing toxic plants and manufacturing poison wasn't against the law because poison had a number of legitimate uses, like killing weeds or animals that were pests. Distributing poison for nefarious purposes was totally illegal. However, and we also had the charge against her for attacking Gunnar. I had asked Gunnar what sentence she could get for assaulting him, and he'd said anything from 6 months to life, depending on the level of violence used. An injury sustained. Since he hadn't been hurt, he wasn't banking on her being put away for long. The trial would be judged by the council members, minus Gunnar, who'd been excused due to the clear conflict of interest. I had to give evidence about the attack, so we sat near the front of the courtroom. The council members were opposite. Connor stared at me and gave me a half smile when I glanced his way. Returned it. Stan was also on the council, and he winked when he made eye contact, making me grimace. Winks weren't professional. We were in a courtroom, for goodness sake. Shirley's fancy lawyer was talking to her quietly, but however much I strained to hear, I only caught mumbling. He wasn't far from us, so I should have been able to hear. Had he used a spell or something? I asked Gunnar if that was allowed, and he nodded. She's allowed to confer with her counsel. With supernat hearing, magic can be used to guarantee confidentiality. I'm not sure what type of magic, but the lawyer will have sorted it. Finally, an usher announced the case name and the parties. Once the court was called to order, the lawyers did their openings. Eric's murder wasn't mentioned at all. It seemed strange that the crime we'd approached Shirley about had nothing to do with her final arrest. The subject was arrested without being read her Miranda rights. Shirley's lawyer looked a shade smug. He was going to try and get the charges dropped on technicality. Gunnar mumbled what sounded like cuss words under his breath. She was held without bail for an extended period, the lawyer continued. Alarm bells were ringing. Fuck. Gunnar hadn't Mirandized her. I'd thought that maybe arrests were done differently here, but it looked like Gunnar's emotions had got the better of him. If she walked away free, then the law was unfair. Shirley's lawyer sat and the prosecution lawyer stood. I hoped he could do some damage control. The prosecution calls Gunnar Johansson to the stand. Gunnar stood, was sworn in, and sat for his questioning. Can you please affirm to the court that this is your statement? The lawyer handed Gunnar a piece of paper. Gunnar read it. It is. Why did you arrest Miss Thompson? Gunnar glared at her. I knocked on her door to ask some routine questions. She opened it and immediately threw a fireball at me. Even now he sounded outraged. And then what happened? She kept flinging them until I restrained her with magic-canceling cuffs. Did you keep her locked up without giving her chance to call a lawyer? No. She got her phone call the second we had her back at the station. Nothing further. Gunnar went to stand up, but the lawyer for the defense stopped him. After you cuffed Miss Thompson, did you at any time Mirandize her? I could see Gunnar thinking. This was it. He hadn't done it. If he lied under oath and I was called to give evidence, what was I going to do? Throw him under the bus and allow a violent woman to walk free? I bit my lip. I had to tell the truth. Anxiety churned in my gut as I waited for his answer. If he lied, some of my faith in him would be shattered. Over the course of our time working together, I'd become convinced he was the salt of the earth. I didn't want to be wrong. No, Gunnar finally admitted I didn't. She demanded a lawyer from the beginning and refused to speak a single word. That shut up the lawyer and he leaned over to ask his client something. After she'd replied, he said, "No more questions." When Gunnar came back, I asked him what the heck was going on. Being Mirandized isn't a constitutional right, although it's tricky. Since she didn't say anything, it's not going to be enough to throw out the case. Thank God. I burst out. What a relief. Is it my turn now? You might not be called, Gunnar said reassuringly. If neither of the lawyers have any questions for you, they'll let your evidence stand in chief. In what? They'll let your statement stand. I conceded on the rights point, so I expect you won't be needed. We continued to watch. I waited for the defendant to be called, but it didn't happen. Why isn't Shirley taking the stand? She hadn't filed a witness statement in her own defense. That's suspicious, right? Gunnar grinned. Hard to prove your innocence if you don't file one. It all rests on the prosecution, though. They still need to prove her guilt beyond reasonable doubt. He looked smug. He obviously knew something I didn't. The defendant had a large amount of synthesized poison in her home. The prosecutor was saying, and my ears pricked back up. When questioned, she refused to answer, as was her right. However, an online search showed that she was selling the poisons over the dark web under the handle Deadly Potions Mistress. I looked at Gunnar, eyes wide with shock. I sent her computer to cyber forensics in Anchorage. That's it. She's going away now, he whispered. The prosecutor proceeded to lay out all the other forensic evidence that they'd found. The counsel convened for a mere 20 minutes. When they returned to the courtroom, Afu spoke. Will the defendant rise? Shirley stood. The counsel finds you guilty. The amount of poison both in your possession at home and in your garden paints the picture of a voracious businesswoman. The sales itemized in your laptop's business accounts indicate that you have more likely than not assisted in the deaths of scores of individuals. Such you are hereby sentenced to 20 years. Court is dismissed. Counsel, thank you for your service. Shirley sank into her chair, her eyes blazing with rage. I was grateful for the green cuffs around her wrists. If she'd had her magic, I could well imagine that various council members would be going up in flames.